Hi, everybody. Hi, good evening. Hi, Mary Jane Doe and Daniel Berry Sports. Highlights Moonlight Soul Path, Angel Loader, a Joy Seeker, and Sassy Mama and Sean B. Hi. Yeah, I got my voice back. I've had a sore throat for 3.5, 4 days. Just came on the next day after my very last live. Um, and it got a little worse. No laryngitis, but it hurt. Today, it doesn't hurt. So I wanted to get a little reading done. Hi, Smiley Miley. Thank you. Um, and just to update, because people are wondering. I called my mother. She was sleeping. Um, I would never want her woken up, but I called her cell. She didn't answer, so I called the landline. And her husband went and woke her and said I was calling. And the only changed news is that she's been home now for a few days and from the hospital, from Mayo Clinic. But this morning, her pain was so bad. I don't know if it's the cancer, the kidneys, or both. But we still don't know where the cancer is stemming from. She's waiting for her test results. And but it was so bad she had to go to the hospital in Decorah and Iowa, where she lives nearby, and get her pain med increased. And they did that happily for her. She said they treated her really well. So that's good. And I think she's on something called Benyl, Benyl or something. So I've never heard of it, but yeah, it is a pill. So it's just kind of a waiting game. So, I told her I'm, not trying to freak out. Oh, thank you, Smiley Miley. Yeah, my voice is kind of high. I just can't help it. It's just always been like that. Um, but yeah, I'm glad I don't have kind of a scratchy or low kind of male voice or something. I guess I'm blessed with a good voice. Yeah, and as far as like Mary Jane Doe says, don't let people's comments get to you. Um, yeah, I mean, I never heard back from that lady in Topanga Valley, but it's got to be really scary. Oh, bento calms your stomach. Okay. Oh, okay. Good. It's got to be really scary for her, because the fire did go through there. Um, and one person died in their home there, so it was bad enough. That's what they said about the people that have been, the remains that they've been finding. One was there in Topanga Valley, and then there was a straight diagonal. Well, straight isn't diagonal, is it? Well, yeah, a straight diagonal line right down the middle of that other town. Now I can't remember it. Not Allentown, but whatever, that in Eaton, Eaton, the Eaton fire. So that's really sad. I believe the people in the Eaton fire didn't have as much of a chance to get out. Maybe it was that way with the Palisades. Not as much of a warning, this kind of thing, because many people said in the Eaton fire, just all of a sudden there was this, you know, orange and then flames, and then boom, you got 5 minutes to just leave. So, or less. Anyway, yeah, like Mary Jane Doe told me in Messenger, we're up to 24 confirmed remains, deaths, and that's super sad. I knew it was going to go up. I think there's probably more, and so do they, because there's still, is it, how many more are missing? I want to say, first I want to say 16 more are missing, but I think it's 20. I think it's higher people missing. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean, right, that they've passed away in the fires. Maybe they just still don't have cell phone service, but more than likely after these days gone by, it's going to be grim news. And like all of you, probably been listening to the news and stuff and finding out what they're doing. And apparently some man dressed up like a firefighter, and he was sitting on the sidewalk, just sitting there. And they went up to him, these other firefighters, and that's how they found out he was an imposter. But yeah, they're not mincing their words. I'll tell you, they're cracking down and they're prosecuting to the fullest. And I didn't know they had the 3 strikes and you're out. Basically, you're done. Uh, Laws in California. I know we used to have that in Washington State, but it was quite a few years ago, at least 20. And I think we no longer have the 3 strikes and you're out. But I should look that up sometime. But yeah, if you have done other things, that made you a felon, I highly doubt it's 3 little misdemeanors and then a third of attempt burglary, you get life. But there's a few men out of the 30 that are probably going to get life for the third offense. So that was interesting today, listening to the DA and the prosecutors and the sheriff and everybody talk. So yeah, I'm at the end of my story, the amount that I'm going to read, because I'm making a late-ish dinner here. I'm going to read, instead of the Al-Anon book, Courage to Change, which is a wonderful little book, but it seems much more fitting to read my Jesus Calling book um, by Sarah Young, Devotions for Every Day of the Year. It's enjoying peace in His presence. And I've had this book for a few years now, and I just love it. I used to read it all the time. I think I read it 3 years in a row and then stopped. Oh, nice. Do you? Yeah, it's a really nice, cute little book. And I'll just start with, I think what I'll do is I'll literally go back to 5 days ago and read, um, was that the 9th? That was Tuesday, the 9th. And we'll just catch up that way, and there'll be some words of encouragement and things like that. Yeah. Okay. And in fact, what I'll do, instead of reading first, I'll read these, and then today's the 13th. I'll end with, or it's been 6 days ago, I'll end with January 13th when I'm done. So this is Jesus Calling. Hi, Amanda, Elizabeth. Hi, you guys. Thanks for being here. Please hit the like if you would. Tell your friends about my channel if you don't mind. I'm trying to get to 3,000. I know it'll happen, one of these days or weeks or something. I'm so close. But so January 9th, I believe, was Tuesday. Let me see. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. No, it wasn't. I'm really kind of confused. Tomorrow's the 14th, so that would have been 7 days ago. So was it the 7th, you guys? Oh, thanks. Thanks for hitting the like. How come I can't think? I cannot think. Tomorrow's the 14th Tuesday, and the fire started last Tuesday. So that would be the 14th, and then 7 days back. That would be the 7th. I thought it was on the 9th when this fire was. Am I all wrong on that? I mean, it's not the end of the world, but I just really... All right. Did the fire start on the 7th, you guys? This is how bad my short-term memory is. Can someone in chat tell me what day last Tuesday was? I can't think. Today's the 13th, so last Monday would have been... Okay, it is the 7th. Okay. See, I'm really not very good at math at all. Thanks, you guys. All right. January 7th. This is out of the Jesus Calling book. It is impossible to praise or thank me too much. As it is written, I inhabit the praises of my people. And remember, this is God talking, or your higher power, whatever that may be. As it is written, I inhabit the praises of my people. Sometimes your adoration is a spontaneous overflow of joy in response to radiant beauty or rich blessings. At other times, your praise is more disciplined and measured, an act of your will. I dwell equally in both types of praise. Thankfulness also is a royal road to draw near me. A thankful heart has plenty of room for me. When you thank me for the many pleasures I provide, you affirm that I am God, from whom all blessings flow. When adversity strikes, and you thank me anyway, your trust in my sovereignty is a showpiece in invisible realms. Fill up the spare moments of your life with praise and thanksgiving. This joyous discipline will help you live in the intimacy of my presence. Wow. Okay, the next day on Wednesday, January 8th of last week. Softly I announce my presence. Shimmering hues of radiance tap gently at your consciousness, seeking entrance. Though I have all power in heaven and on earth, I am infinitely tender with you. The weaker you are, the more gently I approach you. Let your weakness be a door to my presence. Whenever you feel inadequate, remember that I am your ever-present help. Hope in me and you will be protected from depression and self-pity. Hope is like a golden cord connecting you to heaven. The more you cling to this cord, the more I bear the weight of your burdens. Thus you are lightened. Heaviness is not of my kingdom. Cling to hope, and my rays of light will reach you through the darkness. Wow. So Tuesday, Wednesday, now we're on to Thursday, January 9th of last week. I am with you and for you. When you decide on a course of action that is in line with my will, nothing in heaven or on earth can stop you. You may encounter many obstacles as you move toward your goal, but don't be discouraged. Never give up. With my help, you can overcome any obstacle. Do not expect an easy path as you journey hand in hand with me, but do remember that I, your very present helper, am omnipotent. Much stress results from your wanting to make things happen before their times have come. One of the main ways I assert my sovereignty is in the timing of events. If you want to stay close to me and do things my way, ask me to show you the path forward moment by moment, instead of dashing headlong toward your goal. Let me set the pace, slow down, and enjoy the journey in my presence. And then Friday, January 10th of last week. Every time you affirm your trust in me, you put a coin into my treasury. Thus you build up equity in preparation for days of trouble. I keep safely in my heart all trust invested in me, with interest compounded continuously. The more you trust me, the more I empower you to do so. Practice trusting me during quiet days when nothing much seems to be happening. Then, when storms come, your trust balance will be sufficient to see you through. Store up for yourself treasure in heaven through placing your trust in me. This practice will keep you in my peace. And then Saturday, January 11th. Trust me, my relinquishing control into my hands. Let go. Did I say my? Trust me by relinquishing control into my hands. Let go and recognize that I am God. This is my world. I made it and I control it. Yours is a responsive part in the litany of love. I search among my children for receptivity to me. Guard well this gift that I have planted in your heart. Nurture it with the light of my presence. When you bring me prayer requests, lay out your concerns before me. Speak to me candidly. Pour out your heart. Then thank me for the answers that I have set into motion long before you can discern results. When your requests come to mind again, continue to thank me for the answers that are on the way. If you keep on stating your concerns to me, you will live in a state of tension. When you thank me for how I am answering your prayers, your mindset becomes much more positive. Thankful prayers keep your focus on my presence and my promises. Okay. And then yesterday on Sunday, January 12th, this is from the Jesus Calling book. Let me prepare you for the day that stretches out before you. I know exactly what this day will contain, whereas you have only vague ideas about it. You would like to see a map showing all the twists and turns of your journey. You'd feel more prepared if you could somehow visualize what is on the road ahead. However, there is a better way to be prepared for whatever you will encounter today. Spend quality time with me. I will not show you what is on the road ahead, but I will thoroughly equip you for the journey. My living presence is your companion each step of the way. Stay in continual communication with me, whispering my name whenever you need to redirect your thoughts. Thus you can walk through this day with your focus on me. My abiding presence is the best roadmap available. All right, well, I'll read today's at the end, and I'm trying to find, I can get up and find it, or somebody could put the, what's it called? The disclaimer in chat if they wouldn't mind. And I can read it out loud from chat. Thanks, you guys. Oh, you too, Amanda Elizabeth? Aw, thanks for saying hi. Yeah, I know you're a close and real believer of Jesus. I just read from the Jesus Calling book. I'm going to read out of that every day instead of an Al-Anon book. Thank you, Mary Jane. Thank you so much. I guess I need to read it. Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purpose such as criticism, comments, news, reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. All right. Hello, Bad Marsh. All right. So we left off, it was quite a long chapter 5 days ago, and for those of you that missed the beginning of the program, I've had a sore throat for 3.5, or I should say 4.5 days, to the point where I've been, sucking on lozenges and reheating my coffee constantly and this kind of thing, and not losing my voice, but it was really, really scratchy. So I'm on chapter 3. It's called Destiny. And this is a woman who changed the names and everything of people and is writing about her journey through alcoholism. Now, since chapter 3, she has quit drinking and going to the bars and this kind of thing. And this book was written in 1996, but it is a New York Times bestseller. It's called Drinking, a Love Story by Carolyn Knapp, Knapp. I read it about 10 years ago, and I was very, very just impressed. And it really, really resonated with me how our first love can literally become and stay alcohol unless you want to do something about it. So she's going through her home, I believe. So I'm going to start a little part of the chapter back. I used to have real ginger, and then we didn't use it, and it went bad. It is a beast. It is. And people end up craving it. Their bodies physically crave it if they don't get control. So, thanks everybody for being here so much. Okay, so instead you got calm and ritual and clear priorities. The main living spaces in our house, kitchen, dining, and living rooms, were modern additions. Okay, she's talking about her home and from the past. Built onto the original structure in 1959, the year I was born. The living room had soaring ceilings, tall picture windows lined one whole wall, and a fireplace and chimney painted white, stretched up to the ceiling at the far end, dividing the living room from the dining area. The whole space had a spare, elegant quality. Furniture covered in muted fabrics, my mother's abstract oils, forming sporadic squares of color on the walls, a sense of graceful hush. There was nothing identifiably wrong in there, nothing but a lingering suspicion of anxiety and sadness, something so subtle it seemed to exist only in the farthest reaches of the rooms, under the gray rug on the floor or whispering behind the curtains. Yet somewhere along the line, through small moments in other people's homes, small observations about their families, I became aware that the lack of storminess in our household spoke to its own set of problems, to a quality of subterfuge, as though difficult and dangerous things lay beneath the surface, too difficult and dangerous to speak of or even acknowledge. I remember being at a friend's house in second grade and seeing her father scoop her up when he came in from work, scoop her up and give her a big hug. I was startled and envious and also a little put off by that. It seemed so odd. We didn't hug in my family. I remember snooping through the bathroom of a friend's mother when I was in 4th or 5th grade and being struck by the array of stuff in there. The lotions and powders, the tubes and compacts that opened and closed with a satisfying click-thock. My mother didn't go in for comforts like that. Except for lipstick and a tiny bit of powder, she wore no makeup, and except for a stock of Pear's glycerin soap, which she special ordered from a catalog, she didn't indulge in fancy beauty products. These were tiny realizations perceived as the little oddities of others, but they spoke to a quality of spareness in her house. a shying away from things sensual, a certain difficulty with indulgence. I snooped through that bathroom with a combination of longing and disdain, sensing that my family was different and that I wasn't supposed to want such things at home as a result, that we were above them somehow. Growing up, I never heard my parents say, I love you, not to us, not to each other. I never heard them fight either. That's something else I picked up as a kid. Adults didn't have conflicts, or if they did, they kept them to themselves, closeting any hints of distress behind closed doors. I remember that my mother had a lot of headaches when I was a teenager. She'd say, I have a headache, and then she'd shut herself up in her bedroom to take a rest before dinner. Sometimes she'd stay in there for several hours, and I'd creep past the door and try to be quiet. I had a sense that the pain she felt was more than merely physical, but it was such a veiled feeling, so disconnected from anything you could see, that I never pursued it, never asked her about it. I also remember one of my father's odder pronouncements. I was about 18, and he and I were standing in my grandmother's apartment before a family dinner. He looked out the window and said, anger and sex, the two great human impulses. He was famous for making statements like that, one-line truths that seemed to zing from some deep part of his brain, a neurological file labeled insight. I didn't really know what he was talking about at the time, but something about the sound of his voice and the look in his eye indicated that his comment was far more personal than it was intellectual, that he was reflecting on his own anger, his own intensely sexual drives. We were both holding glasses of Chardonnay, staring out the window. I nodded soberly and gulped down the rest of my wine. I often seemed to be the subject of my father's statements. We'd be sitting in the living room alone before dinner, and he'd look at me, then pierce the silence between us with a summary phrase. You look like an outsider in the family, he announced once, out of the blue. I do. I was 14 or 15, and I just looked at him sideways, then stared at my feet. He was right, of course, the human X-ray. He touched on my moodiness a lot, my tendency toward depression. He commented on how much time I spent away from home as a teenager, sleeping at girlfriends' houses, getting away. After a while, I couldn't tell if these things were statements of fact or illusions that became fact because he prompted them, and not once did it occur to me that these were the very issues that preoccupied him. Depression, anger, a need to flee. At the time, he just unnerved me. The thing is, hints of distress are like air. You can't see them, can't hold them in your hand and subject them to proper examination. There was no tangible evidence of anger between my parents, and no outward expression of lust or sexual drive either. Sometimes I'd wake up late at night and hear them arguing in their bedroom. My room was directly above theirs, and although I couldn't make out any words, I could hear raised voices and long, angry pauses. But I tried not to make too much of that. My parents always had a strong intellectual bond, and they were both deeply passionate about books and music and art. For all I knew, they were down there arguing about Proust. Like I said, there was no tangible evidence of trouble. When they sat down to cocktails in the living room every evening, my parents were a picture of staid sophistication. The bowl of unsalted peanuts, the tiny glass dish of lemon twists, my mother would knit, my father would hold his martini and gaze out across the room. Rage and sexuality simmering so far beneath the surface, they barely caused a ripple. So as we can see, her parents are alcoholics too, or were. I think they passed away in an earlier chapter. The quiet, and she's talking about her past, of course, the quiet control of her household complicated matters for me and still does. There's no little point. To my father, singled me out in this weird way, and I became an alcoholic. I grew up in a quiet and controlled setting, and I became an alcoholic. Somehow it doesn't have quite the same ring to it as Abby's story. I come from generations of alcoholics, and I too became an alcoholic. Abby was her girlfriend in the past. A lot of AA meetings begin with what's called a qualification, which means someone stands or sits in the front of the room and tells their story to the rest of the group. What happened when they drank, how they changed after they stopped. It's not uncommon to hear very dramatic qualifications, stories that start with the words, "There was a lot of abuse in my household," and go on to catalog the full range of modern American trauma: sexual abuse, physical abuse, psychological abuse. I sometimes feel a little out of place by comparison, a little guilty that my own narrative is so spare, and I often wish I had a story that would lay it all out in clearer, more vivid detail. Here's the setup. Here's precisely what happened. But there's rarely a single defining event, and even people from the most chaotic alcoholic backgrounds struggle with that knowledge. Even people like Abby. For all the concrete reasons she had to drink, she still can't look back and say with certainty, it's because of this or it's because of that. None of us can. I can say that alcohol traveled in my family, but it did so with characteristic subtlety, in the quiet, winding manner of a hidden stream, and only from one direction, my father's side. My mother's family didn't drink at all to speak of, at least not alcoholically. Her parents, descendants of Russian Jews who emigrated to the U.S. in the 1890s and early 1900s, lived in Brookline, Massachusetts, outside of Boston. Her father was a successful businessman who rose up the ranks of the Converse Rubber Company and became quite wealthy. They created a genteel household, and when we went to visit them for Sunday dinner, which we did every week when I was a kid, the adults would gather in the living room before dinner and sip their drinks in a quiet, non-compulsive way that suggested a pleasant ritual, nothing more. Top shelf vodka on the rocks for my grandmother, expensive gin for the men. I never saw my mother have more than 2 drinks, almost always a very watered down scotch, and I never saw any member of her family drunk. When I went to rehab many years later, an uncle from that side of the family would take me aside and say, "You'll be okay. Your Jewish blood will carry you through." For good or ill, I seem to have inherited more blood from my father's side. I look like him, same high forehead, same hands and feet, same constitution. I also drank like him and took to liquor in much the same way. Not long ago, I found a journal he'd kept when he was 19 during a summer he'd spent on a ranch in the Southwest. Every third page had a drinking story: drinking in small town bars, drinking with dinner, repeated references to demon alcohol. He grew up in a prominent Protestant family in upstate New York, the son of wealth on his mother's side, and although he never talked about it this way, drinking was a natural and significant part of his milieu, as much a part of the landscape he grew up in as old money and Ivy League educations. Rarefied living. There are great photographs of my father and his brother Bob during their early 20s, sitting on the patio outside their family's grand estate in upstate New York, dressed in tennis whites and sipping martinis. Marts, they called them. Let's have a mart. My father showed up for his Harvard Medical School interview with a raging hangover. He'd tell me that story in a bemused way, an example of youthful discretion. But he didn't tell it often, and he rarely told other stories like it. I didn't know if my father's parents drank, or how much, or in what ways. If drinking wreaked havoc on his side of the family, it did so privately, and the details were never shared with outsiders. Yeah, I just looked at chat. Oh, I see. Yeah, he said in a splash of brandy. Yeah, yeah, not for me. I quit and I plan on staying quit. Stopped, quit. I quit in 2011. I had no choice, but I also wanted to. It was time, thank God. Um, okay, so there were clues, those scattered bits of evidence that alcohol caused problems, but they seemed distant and played out, safely tucked away in the past. Years before I was born, my father had been arrested for drunk driving. Twice, I gather. Back then, before he met my mother, he'd also been married to an alcoholic, a woman named Shelby. We used to hear about Shelby in ugly bits and pieces when I was growing up. She'd call on the phone drunk and yelling, making unreasonable demands, and an unspoken mythology grew up around her. She was a drunk, a sick woman, bad news, and the polar opposite of my mother, who was beautiful and graceful and controlled. We never talked about alcoholism, though, and we spoke about Shelby only in code. She called. She's having a fit about money, or about one of their 3 kids. We all believed, I think, that my father had left chaos and illness behind when he left Shelby, exchanging those qualities for my mother's goodness. And we all did our best to ignore our feelings about Wiki, the truest legacy of that marriage, and the one piece that followed him inescapably into his union with my mother and into my own early childhood. Wiki was my father's 3rd child from his marriage to Shelby. He was blind from birth, emotionally disturbed, and severely retarded, although no one used that word, retarded. I didn't see him much when I was a kid, but he was always there in the background, an issue that wouldn't go away, a source of strain, and the only obvious one, between my parents. Wiki lived with them from 1956 to 1958, the first 2 years of their marriage. As the story I grew up with went, they'd been in Italy on their honeymoon, and Shelby, also in Italy at the time, had approached my father and said essentially, "Here, he's yours. I can't deal with him anymore. You take him." My father couldn't say no, so they brought him home with them to live. Wiki was 10 years old then, a blind and angry, uncontrollable kid who resented my mother and let her know it. He had tantrums, got into things, broke favorite possessions, an antique Chinese jewelry box, a vase. My mother described those years as a nightmare. My father would go off to work in the morning and leave her there with Wiki, leave her to entertain and feed him, to haul him off to appointments with this specialist and that one. Once, while she was taking him in a taxi cab to see his therapist, Wiki lost control and tried to choke her, put his hands around her neck and just squeezed. After a while, I don't think my mother felt even a shred of pity or sorrow for Wiki, just a resentment that grew to match his own. My father kept promising they'd get extra help, find the right person to come in and tend to him, find the right program or psychiatrist or group home to help him. The truth was, he couldn't admit how far beyond help Wiki really was. My mother understood the truth but felt helpless to use it. For her, the situation seemed hopeless and frustrating and in its own way humiliating. Her own family had been skeptical of my father from the start. A divorced Protestant psychoanalyst, 11 years her senior, he seemed like an unorthodox choice at best. She told her parents that he had children, but she hadn't mentioned anything specific about Wiki, and she certainly hadn't been prepared to have the child living with them. But my father promised he'd be there for only a short time, a few months, just until they found the right situation, and she put up with it. She didn't feel she had a choice. She also couldn't quite believe it. My father had wooed my mother with an intensity that seemed indissoluble. They'd met at a cocktail party, and he'd seen her across the room, a dark-haired, naturally beautiful woman who radiated quiet intelligence and reserve, and as he told it, he'd fallen in love almost immediately. He pursued her in the most classical sense, wrote her love letters, sent her poems, focused on her like salvation. Shortly before they got married, he'd been smoking a cigarette in a restaurant. My mother looked at him and said, "If you keep that up, you're going to die on me." My father had smoked 2 packs a day for more than 25 years. He put the cigarette out and never had another one. Wiki's presence was the first real sign that my father's devotion to her might be more complex, more qualified than she'd felt it to be before. He was the first tangible sign of trouble from my father's past, of baggage brought and left, like the abandoned child at her feet. A few months after Wiki turned into 6 months, then a year, my parents renovated their house. My mother got pregnant with Andrew, my older brother. Wiki was still there. When Andrew was an infant, my mother would find Wiki creeping blindly into his room, and it terrified her. Later, when Andrew was about 18 months old, Wiki turned a wheelbarrow over on him in the front yard and trapped him underneath. My mother was pregnant with my sister and me at the time. Wiki left shortly after that, went to a series of residential programs and schools for the blind, and continued essentially not to improve. He came back only occasionally from then on, weekends here and there, Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving. I found him upsetting and physically repulsive, and I used to cringe when I heard he was coming to stay. Wiki was overweight and badly dressed, and he had a pale, doughy face with a broad, flat nose and slitty eyes that seemed to roll back into his head without warning. He was spasmodic. My father would steer him to a chair in the living room, and he'd sit there and rock back and forth constantly. Periodically, he'd stop, just freeze, his head tilted up and to the side, as if he were listening for a bird in the distance. Then his hand might jerk up to his face or his head. He'd put his finger in his nose, or scratch his hair, or tug at his ears. My father would often look absent, stressed, and sad when Wiki was around, and he'd seem to get lost in his own thoughts. Wiki would be in the middle of a long monologue, and then he'd interrupt himself and try to ascertain whether my father was listening, whether he was still in fact in the room. "Dad," he'd say, looking up, looking perplexed. "Dad?" I hated that. It was like an exaggerated version of the way I so often felt, trying to gauge the depth of my father's presence. I also hated watching Wiki eat, which he did with the undiscriminating hunger of a dog, stuffing too much food into his mouth at once, using his hands when he should have used a fork, sometimes picking his plate up at the end of a meal and licking it clean. My father would ignore this until my mother, appalled, glared at him with sufficient force. Wiki's hands would be searching the plate, groping at it for morsels, and you could see my mother freeze with tension, watching him. "Pete," she'd say to my father, glaring, nodding toward Wiki, and my father would look up from his own plate, reach over, place a fork in Wiki's hand. "Use this," he'd say, and Wiki would use the fork for a few minutes, then abandon it, and the whole cycle would start again. After dinner, Wiki would go up to his room, listen to music on a tape recorder, and talk to himself. He was always rehashing some event from a day or a week ago, obsessing over the details, repeating bits of conversation. I'm finding this whole part pretty sad, but I'm a complete utter empath, like probably most of you are. Oh, good for you. Wonderful. Talking about this guy. I mean, he didn't ask to be born but she's discussing different situations in her household, and which brought on some stress in the family dynamics and stuff, right? Okay, so hear him up there muttering. My parents would sit in the living room silently. They rarely fought openly about Wiki or even talked about him, but you could feel his presence in the room like a great fatigue. My mother would stare down at her knitting, a tightness in her expression. My father would read, looking up periodically to stare out across the room at something the rest of us couldn't see. Wiki explained that quiet sense of sadness in our house better than anything else, and I learned to see him as the central problem, a cancer in my parents' marriage. It made perfect sense. The ill will he generated during his visits seemed entirely specific to him. My mother's tension and headaches, that freezing at the table, my father's preoccupied sadness in Wiki's presence, the weight of silence the rest of us felt at the table. It was Wiki, wasn't it? It was Wiki. When I was 29, Wiki died suddenly of a grand mal seizure. Oh, that's sad. He was 42. A few months after his funeral, my half-sister Penny. I don't remember reading any of this. Maybe I skimmed the whole book. I'm just not remembering this. A few months after his funeral, my half-sister Penny, Wicky's oldest sister, sent me a letter about what it was like to grow up with him, breaking the silence about the role alcohol had played. Nobody ever talked about it, she wrote, but it's completely obvious to me now that he suffered from fetal alcohol syndrome. Fetal alcohol syndrome? A life ruined by alcohol, just like that? The news was jarring, one of those facts that seems to come out of nowhere, but also makes sense, a piece of some larger puzzle that was there all along, lurking, but not identified. I was drinking a glass of wine in my apartment when I opened Penny's letter. I'd read a little about fetal alcohol syndrome, and thinking about it, I could see that Wicky did have a lot of the characteristic features: elongated folds in his eyelids, a flat, low nasal bridge, a narrow upper lip. On some level, I could also see by then that I was drinking too much, and I remember putting the letter back in the envelope and thinking I wouldn't be able to have children if I kept it up. If I ever got pregnant, I thought, the baby would turn out like Wicky. I couldn't do it. The thought startled me, but only for a minute. The main feeling about his death was relief. My father died 4 years later on a Monday in April. I was 32 and unprepared. The morning before he died, a hospice nurse named Carla came to the house to examine him and said he'd probably live for another few days, possibly even a week. He'd fallen into a coma 3 days earlier, but his vital signs were strong, his breathing even, his heart rate normal. So we waited, which is what we'd done for the past 11 months. I'd already been drinking daily for the previous 5 years, maybe more, but when my father's brain tumor was diagnosed, all bets were off. His illness opened a well of fear in my chest that felt bottomless, and I drank to fill it, to escape it, to numb it. I drank because I felt I had no choice and because I didn't know what else to do. I drank without thinking. For the 2 nights prior to Carla's visit, I'd slept in the twin bed set up next to my father's hospital bed in my parents' bedroom. I should know this, you guys. I think Carla is her twin sister or her fraternal sister, but I can't remember. It's only been 5 days. The idea was to give my mother some relief. She was exhausted, waking up every time he stirred in the bed beside her, expecting him to die any second. So my sister and I sent her upstairs to my old bedroom for a couple of nights, and I took over the vigil. I was terrified that he might die alone, and I think I was sufficiently conscious of reality at the time, of the fact that he really was about to die, that I managed not to drink too much on those 2 nights. I could be lying about that. I don't remember what I was drinking or how much, but I do remember standing by his bedside each evening before I went to sleep and putting my hand on his hand. I love you, Dad, I'd whisper. We're all here. Everything will be okay. These were not the kinds of things we said in my family. I love you. We're all here. But I forced myself to say them, and then I'd get into bed and try to listen to his breathing. I don't remember if I passed out those nights or not. But when Carla came, she told us the vigil would go on for several more days. I decided I'd leave the house and spend the night with Michael, my boyfriend, take a little break. He and I would have dinner at the house with my mother and Becca and her husband Andy, and then we'd leave, drive the mile or so across Cambridge to his apartment. I drank cognac that night. I'd bought the bottle over the weekend, a $48 bottle of Renault, which was my favorite, and I'd stashed it in my bag. And every half hour or so, I'd go upstairs to my bedroom on the pretense of wanting to go smoke a cigarette, and I'd take the bottle out of the bag, and I'd smoke, and I'd slug the cognac. Huge gulps of it. I went through more than half the bottle that evening, plus wine with dinner, plus a few beers before dinner, and I don't even remember getting to Michael's house. I passed out within minutes, and I was so far gone so deep in the fog that he had to shake me awake at 1:30 in the morning when the phone rang. When Andy called to tell us that something had changed, something was different about my father's breathing, and we better get over there now. Maybe we would have gotten there faster if I hadn't been drinking, if I'd been more alert, better able to throw on my clothes and jump into the car. I can't say, but my father died before we got to the house. Andy met us at the door. He looked at me and said, "About 2 minutes ago." I was still drunk. Oh my goodness gracious. That's just depressing and sad and real. And I'm literally just going to end it there. Chapter 3 was a really long chapter. So I read the first half 5 days ago, and my throat was okay. Tomorrow's chapter 4 is called Hunger. And yeah, so it's a very transparent writing, and different parts of it you guys may be able to identify with from your past or what you're going through now. I know I can. So I'm going to read today's January 13 Jesus Calling book. It is very sad. It's really sad. And I like to end on happier notes on my lives, But this is where we're at. Okay, January 13, the Jesus Calling book. Try to view each day as an adventure, carefully planned out by your guide. Instead of staring into the day that is ahead of you, attempting to program it according to your will, be attentive to me and to all I have prepared for you. Thank me for this day of life, recognizing that it is a precious, unrepeatable gift. Trust that I am with you each moment, whether you sense my presence or not. A thankful, trusting attitude helps you to see events in your life from my perspective. A life lived close to me will never be dull or predictable. Expect each day to contain surprises. Resist your tendency to search for the easiest route through the day. Be willing to follow wherever I lead. No matter how steep or treacherous the path before you, the safest place to be is by my side. Wow. Made me think of the fires. No matter how steep or treacherous the path before you, the safest place to be is by my side. All right. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, that's right. You've got sober time too. All right, you guys. Well, these firemen, as most of you know, and policemen are working so incredibly arduously. They're working, the police are doing 20-hour shifts. They said the firemen are doing 38. I mean, that's all day, all night, all into almost the next night with no sleep. And as some of you know, the prisoners, right, of some of the jails. Thanks so much. Thank you. You guys are so sweet. That have been in training. They've been in some kind of fire training. So they're not just yanking people out of the jails, right? And saying, okay, go up there with this shovel and dig dirt, fight fires, and help us make contingency lines and this and that and the other thing. So that was good to know. And yeah, So, just, prayers for all of them and all the people affected in whatever way it is. Even people that have their houses, their friends probably, some of them don't, and all of that. And so, yeah, I've been glued to it, of course. And no matter where you are in the United States, it's really something. And yeah. Oh, thanks so much. Yeah. Oh my gosh, did he? I didn't even know that. I know there's 8. Last night they said 9 different, firefighting teams. Everybody on the Northwest, even Montana now, Washington, Montana, Oregon, all the way down. And then I think some people from Texas and definitely New Mexico and Canada. And then Nevada, maybe Utah, definitely Arizona. Let's see. Yeah. And then all the guardsmen down there, we can't forget them. And yeah, thanks a lot for hanging out the whole time. It's been a teeny bit over an hour, and I have 4 hours left of, well, let's see, did I have 4? Did I have, I think I had 4 hours left of free StreamYard, and it's less glitching. So when I'm reading books and things, you know, excuse me, I don't want it glitching all over the place. All right, you guys. Love you so much. Really do. And prayers for all of you. We can only do what's first things first. I learned that in Alcoholics Anonymous. I also learned keeping it simple. So, like when my friend was all bothered, she forgot to bring a certain gift for Christmas for us. I was like, it's okay. This next time we see you, it doesn't matter if it's spring or what it is. Like, keep things simple, because that'll help you have, less stress, and you don't want to have a stroke like I did 4 years ago. It'll be 4 years this February 4th that I had an akismic thalamic stroke out of the darn blue. And I felt really good that day. Yeah. So if I can have one, anyone can, because I felt totally fine and I had a clean bill of health. So, yeah. Okay, you guys. See you hopefully tomorrow. Take care. Please hit the like. This is PCT is Extreme. And if you haven't subbed up to me, please do so and help me get to my goal of 3,000. Okay. Thank you. Bye for now.